short lesson today on that. There's a lot in John 6, and it's a very impactful chapter in John's Gospel. It's 71 verses, and a lot of people, when they study John 6, they break it up into pieces. And we're not doing that, because I believe the messages that are in John 6 all feed on this same topic. They're all related to Jesus as the bread of life. And so if you were to study just the feeding of the 5,000 men and didn't carry on to the bread of life, then you would miss that connection between him saying he's the bread of life and what he did by feeding the 5,000. He walks on the water in this chapter. He tells them, he starts talking about Jesus is the bread of life. We also know that when he gave them this hard teaching of him being the bread of life, that many of the disciples that had been following him, that saw all the great and wonderful works that he did, the signs that he did, many deserted him. Many deserted him. And I thought about when he looked out and saw all those people that had left, and he looked at his disciples that were left, and he said, "Will you leave me too?" I just thought about that, that hurt him. He was hurt that, he gave them food to eat, and they were looking for him to do other miracles. And then when he talked about his body and the bread of life, that he was the bread of life, they left. And then the last thing I would mention is Peter's confession of faith, and that was a big deal too. I think about that too. He said, "Where will I go? You have the bread of life." That's what I want to say. I want to say that too. Let's remind you a little bit more about the purpose of John's gospel, his testimony. He's addressing the Jews that are around him and Judaism. He wants them to understand all the things, all the practices that they have been doing for a long time, and recast them to show that it's him. He is all the things that they were doing were pointing to him, and that he is now the answer to all those things. He was trying to strengthen Christians' understanding and faith. So he wasn't necessarily so much talking to people that didn't believe in him. He was talking about people that believed in him, but that had some understanding that wasn't quite right. When you look at the festivals and the Jewish things that they were doing, they were so focused on the actions of those things that they missed the point of him. So he was clarifying in some of the institutions. We've already talked about the purification one. Where did he talk about that? Do y'all remember? Ritual purification, how he addressed that one. What was the sign that dealt with that one? The water to wine, do you remember that? That was the water in the pots were the water that they had ritually used for cleansing, and he turned it into wine. He changed the meaning of that ritual, that it was still pointing to him. The temple, where he cleansed the temple and what his house was supposed to be a house of prayer, and then the rabbi and the holy well. So you remember where the holy well was? What am I talking about there? Samaritan woman. So he's addressing all those things up to this point in his lessons. The Sabbath, he dealt with the Sabbath last time. He healed on the Sabbath, so he's changing the meaning of the Sabbath. And today, this lesson is dealing with Passover. He's dealing with Passover. Just as Jerry said in his sermon, what was going on at this time? All the Jewish people were gathered to celebrate the Passover. So what do you think they talked about in their sermons and in their conversation and their prayers? What were they talking about? What were some of the things they talked about?
Talking about being fed. Moses fed them all the time.
Fed them. They were talking about how he fed them. How did Moses feed them? the way they talked about it, who did they give credit for providing the manna from heaven? They gave Moses the credit, and one of the things that Jesus did in those first few verses in chapter 6 was to say, it wasn't Moses that gave you that bread from heaven. Those came directly from God. It was God that provided that. Now, why did he? What is he trying to point? If we say that the message of feeding the 5,000 was pointing to Jesus, how was that pointing to him? What did that have to do? Was it just a great thing to feed everybody? What do you think? What was the purpose of that?
Maybe they esteemed Moses so much, he was trying to say, yeah, but watch this.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. He was talking about I'm more powerful than Moses. Yes, I think that was probably one of the things.
Yeah, someone greater than Moses was in their very midst
Right.
and showing them the things that, in a new way, the things they had esteemed through their history, and they were getting a new view. Not that they were getting it, but they were getting a new view.
Good. They were getting a new view. One of the things that I think Jerry showed it on his slides. In the Hebrew Bible, there is some scripture in there that talks about the fact that when the new Messiah comes, he is going to feed just like Moses. He's going to feed the people with manna from heaven. He's going to open the storehouse, the treasury, and from that, again, they'll be fed from heaven. So he's talking to the Jewish people about what happened feeding all these people. It gave him an opportunity to then talk about the fact that, all right, I'm here. I'm the new Messiah. I fed the people. So do you think they made a connection that maybe he is the Messiah? And I think the answer is yes. Why would I say that? What was it that they tried to do to Jesus?
They wanted to make him king.
They wanted to make him king. So when they realized that he had done this great miracle, this sign, they decided that they were going to make him the king. And so he left. He that wasn't his purpose for being there. So he redefined through the feeding of the 5,000. He redefined what the manna from heaven was about. The bread from heaven. So who was the bread from heaven? It was him. It was him. How might the crowd's perception of Jesus providing bread influence their belief that he was a prophet who has come into this world? How did that manifest itself? What did the people's reaction to that? First thing we've already talked about. They wanted to make him king. What else did they want to do? What else did they do? They began to question him, right? They began to ask him different things about, what was his purpose, what was he doing there. Then he walks on the water. Of course, so they try to make him king. Then in verse 16, the disciples go out into the lake. They begin to have things thrown around in the sea there, and he walks out onto the water. All right, so what has that got to do with this concept of Jesus becoming the manna from heaven? Jesus is the bread of life. I like that sound. Why do you think he did that? What's that got to do with this story? Walking on water. Any answer's good.
It was a test of their faith.
Of the disciples' faith?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And And that he was above what we humans would see as the norm.
Yeah,
He did the impossible.
yeah, yeah. So the,
Sometimes I think he did those things just so that they would believe
mm,
that he was the Son of God. Because
Straight
even
in.
though he had told them that, and they did believe him, but when he did those type of things, they could see it with their own eyes. So
Yeah.
they could, it helped them to believe what he had been telling them about that he was the Son of God, and maybe even some of the other things that he was telling them was to come.
right, right. Yeah, I think this was to strengthen his disciples' faith, so that when,
You had it, you could also walk on water. When he lost it, the one that got out,
yeah,
he did walk on water for a short time.
yeah, right.
He lost it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was to reassure him that he was God. You, like you said, he was over. The disciples getting on the other shore was not going to happen unless something happened. So he did do that. If I told you today that to be healed, maybe you got some disease. To be healed, you had to drink my blood. What would be your reaction to that?
The biologist in me would be displeased.
What? The what?
The biologist in me would be displeased.
The biologist would be displeased. Okay. All right. What else? Would you do it? Walt would not do it. Yeah.
Depends on how much testing I got to do first.
That's what
There'll be something powerful in my blood that's going to heal you. All you got to do is drink my blood.
There's several things that aren't there first.
Have you been to
You hadn't
Haiti?
done anything to prove that you got the blood yet, though.
Oh, I got to prove myself. So you would ask me to do what? Perform a sign or something.
Yeah, that's what they do.
You're going to test it. You want to make sure you can see it physically. You know, you want the science to prove it out. That my,
No. It's the things I don't want to be there. I need to prove aren't there.
so I'm not going to make you worse? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he talks about the bread of life, I am the bread of life. And then he slowly but surely gives them a harder and more difficult thing to understand as he goes along.
See,
Right.
I think that as the people, they were grown, they're grown accustomed to him doing things. I mean, to bring them along. And then when, when he finally told them that, they couldn't accept it anymore because that really wasn't he wasn't doing that just to draw them right then.
Yeah,
He was trying to draw them long term,
Yeah.
that he was the Messiah.
yeah,
And they couldn't grasp that. That's why a bunch of them left.
yeah. They couldn't grasp that. I mean, I think about stuff like that too. Is like, if somebody today had come in and said, "You got to eat my body, and you got to drink my blood if you want to be okay," I don't have a problem with that. We look at them with this high and mighty eye. They should know that it's Jesus and that He's God and all that. But maybe what was the problem with how they responded? I think their response is just like yours. It was like, I want to prove it out. I want a sign. I want somebody to go first. I want, all that's kind of things that we would do. But they eventually got to a point where they just said, "Hey, this is ridiculous. Would you think I was crazy?
Yeah.
You would think I'd lost my mind." Now these folks, a lot of these folks, not all of them, had seen him feed 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves, right? And they had seen him calm, walk on water. They had seen, a lot of other things that he had done. But yet, when he gives them this saying, he just couldn't accept it. I think we might have been exactly the same way. I think I probably would have.
It's so different than what they were expecting. I think it makes it even harder for them to kind of grasp it because they had in their mind something totally different
Sure.
than what he was offering. So it was even, in my mind, it would be doubly hard to accept what he was saying because it wasn't what they were expecting.
Mhm. It wasn't what they were expecting. So they had expected him to open up the storehouse from heaven again, and manna, bread would flow down from heaven. So they were expecting the Messiah to come back and restore the kingdom, and then sit on the throne, put Rome in its place, free them, put them at a higher position in the community, all these kind of things. And when he got there, he was just not close to that. They had missed the whole point. I think, so because we've only got a few minutes left, apply that to today. Do we have the same challenge today? Do we have that same challenge today? So if he said the bread of life, eat my bread, eat my body, and drink my blood, what do we automatically think about in our assembly? We think about the Lord's Supper. And there is nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think that probably is our reminder of Jesus. But is it the bread and the cup? Is that the point of the Lord's Supper? Is the bread and the cup? Yes, ma'am.
In the Old Testament, it talks about how you can't, like when it talks about food rules, it says you can't eat anything with blood because that the life is in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my brain goes when I read this, that you take his blood because that's where life is. And then when in the Old Testament, it talks about the bread of the presence, and that was where, that was life in that bread of the presence. And that's where my brain goes when I'm thinking about the bread. And so for me, it's about life is in Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's my thought process as I read through this. But I also know the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're in the midst of it.
Right.
And I can't imagine the dilemma and the confusion being in the midst of this and trying to figure all that
Right.
out.
You think you would have left when he said that?
I would have lots of questions.
You would have lots of questions.
Lots of questions.
I guarantee we would. And so, question is, how do we get the bread of life? How do we get that? How do you eat the bread of life? How do you eat Jesus' bread?
Well, the bread is offered through the word. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So to take in the bread is to take his word.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We dedicate ourselves to.
Taking it in. Okay. Is that it? Is that it?
I think it circles back to your beginning point
Mm-hmm.
about maturity and our understanding that what we understand today may not be what we understand in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So the more of the word that we take in and the more we try to understand, maybe our, perceptions change, but I think it's all about taking in the bread is maturing your own life to be closer to what Jesus lived.
Right.
So,
Good.
just to
He
keep
said,
working.
do this in
on it.
remembrance of me.
Yes. He did say
That's the way
that.
I see it.
Do it in remembrance of him.
Bread is sustenance.
Well, did they get hungry after they took the bread?
Physically.
Did they get hungry again?
If we're doing this right, yes, we're hungry. We're hungry for the word after
Yeah.
we take it in.
Yeah.
You have to keep doing it over and over again.
I think it's such a fabulous word to think about because Jesus, we take him in. How do we take in the bread of Jesus? Because we know what it is. We know it's the Bible or Scripture and the Word, but how do you take it in? I mean, is it just up here in my head?
No. there's a New Year's resolution, I put it in the bulletin a few years ago, but I really like it. It says, read the Bible, and then it says, do what it says.
Mhm.
So, read it and encompass it, study it, and then go out and just do what it says. And I think by doing, that makes you feel better, it does good for other people, and then it just gives you this, I don't know, this good feeling, and it just kind of encourages you to keep doing those things and keep reading and keep, the more you do things, the more you want to do things, the more you read, the more you want to read. And it's not just reading, it's studying, it's, flipping back the notes, just get all encompassing, the
So that you're
Bible.
describing the hunger part of it.
Yeah.
And what I'm really thinking, that it's deeper than that. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's spiritual. Jesus wasn't, they were doing the Passover meal, they were doing all these things.
They were living,
I think the emphasis is not so much on the doing piece. It is the believing and
Becoming.
making it part of who you are. You're ingesting it. It's changing who I am. I'm a different person because Jesus, his Spirit has indwelt me, and it's believing. Is the bread? Could you describe bread as believing and the faith part of it? Ingesting that. Now, naturally, we've talked many times about faith being an active thing of what I do. But I believe the believing thing and what he's trying to emphasize in John 6 is more about taking on his Spirit, taking his blood and his bread into my body, and it changes me, it changes who I am. You see, it's a little different, right, than just the things I do. They are a result. Those are things that are outward things that I do. The inward part is what God is after, I think.
There's that old adage, you are what you eat,
Yeah?
and
Yeah.
everything, and I think that's the idea. It's about the being, and eating Jesus is breaking down those stories in the gospel as to the heart of Jesus, what was being communicated. Like when he conveyed to that woman, I neither do I condemn you.
Right.
That's about a heart thing, about how I feel about a person fallen in a
Yeah.
moment. It's also a heart thing, I think sometimes our fellowship, man, look what Jesus did to the Pharisee. But what he did to the Pharisees was about self-righteous people who were
Yeah.
vindictive, and a lot of times that's not who we direct those kind of strong
Yeah.
feelings toward. We direct them toward people who we disagree with
Yeah.
or who have fallen in sin.
Right.
That's not what Jesus did.
Right.
And I think that's it. It's about the being, because the Pharisees were doing, but their heart was far from
Heart
it.
was far from him.
Yeah.
And he,
So you are what you eat.
so I guess that's you can do all the right things and not be eating of the bread of life. Right? You can do all the right things. You can be here at church, you can give, you can do all the wonderful acts. Now, I'm not picking on those wonderful acts. I think but if you don't do it by first ingesting and believing in faith in Jesus, then all those other things are just your personal acts. You're just a good person. You haven't accepted and brought in Jesus. You had something to say, Jen?
Yeah, there's in verse 63, the last sentence says, and this is Jesus speaking, he says, the words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. And that's what this is for us. It gives us access to
Yeah.
spirit and life.
So this is one of those things that I worry about myself, that I'm disciplined enough to make myself do a lot of good things. Maybe even react in the right way sometimes. But if I don't, if it's not coming from the source of Jesus, then it's just me being a good person. And I want to be not just a good person. I want to be led by his Spirit and doing the things because that's what he wants. And he gets the glory, not me. All right. Well, guys, knocking on the door. We better go.